Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the Bleav Network. Check out Bleav in Astros with Mike Stanton, Bleav in Texans with Cecil Shorts when you get a chance. And joining me is my co-host, Stephen Kerr, 65 plus years in sports journalism between the two of us. Later in the show, we debate the ideal Astros lineup moving forward and look at the return of two key pitchers. But Stephen, got to start with the Texans, who trimmed down their roster. Their most surprising cut, Noah Brown, right? Did that catch you off guard?
Yes and no. I would have liked to have seen Noah stay on the roster. I mean, when he was healthy, he made some big plays for CJ Stroud last year. But, there are a lot of the younger guys that, were pushing and they can do special teams. So, I don't know, Robert. It's one of those days where, do they still call him the Turk? The quote unquote assistant, doing a guy that knocks on your door and says, "Coach wants to see you in his office. Bring your playbook."
Şengün is the Turk now.
Oh, Şengün is okay. Well, yeah, I knew that. But when the Turk makes his rounds, there's always going to be one or two names that will jump out at you. I mean, every year, I don't think there's ever been a year that I've gone, what? And Noah Brown, you probably have to put him in that category at least a little bit.
This is what surprises me about the Noah Brown release. There's no doubt it came down to Brown or Robert Woods. According to Spotrac, Brown's $4 million cheaper than Woods. Both of them get injured a lot, so that's a wash. Noah was more explosive when he played last year, and releasing Woods would have freed up more money. Are you guessing, Stephen, it just came down to who they thought was the healthiest? Because obviously it came down to the veteran guys. They weren't going to release Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly what it is, Robert. And I mean, now we must point out that we're recording this a little after 4:00 on cut down day. So you know how it goes, Robert. It seems like every time we stop a podcast, something else happens. So the Texans could do something else. They could trade Robert Woods, for goodness sake, right after we do this. But assuming that they haven't, that I think that's really what it is. Robert Woods is a veteran, but again, a health is a concern for him. So that's just something we're going to have to keep an eye on. That if Robert Woods can stay healthy, he can contribute. But that's really the question.
Yeah, you said it. As far as this whole deal is very movable as we go in the next few days, because there's going to be other guys out there. We say that knowing that you guys know that. You guys know we're dealing with that.
Our listeners are very smart. So
yeah, we got a great crowd that watches this show. Ben Skowronek, one of the receivers that they decided to release, cost the Texans a 6th-round pick, or a 6th and a 7th pick swap, I guess you would say. So they basically moved back in the draft. And Stephen, it was an odd move to trade for a receiver, a crowded position on the roster, unless you were sure you could make a roster spot because of Skowronek's special teams and offensive versatility. I just found it odd that they spent actual capital to get this guy.
Yeah, that's really what I was going to say, Robert, is I thought Skowronek would make the team just based on his versatility, because he can play special teams. And I mean, he's shown some flashes at receiver, but I don't think he was going to get a lot of touches of the ball except on special teams. So, but the fact that, they released him, and again, this is fluid, it could change, but as of now, I'm a little bit surprised that they didn't keep him just for his versatility angle.
Why couldn't you keep him? Well, because you can't kill off Steven Sims. He keeps coming back like Freddy Krueger, and the Texans just decided that, of the special teams receivers, he was the guy that they were going to keep. And they also waived all their late 1st-round picks, including Jawar Jordan, who was a candidate to return kicks, and also Marcus Harris and Solomon Byrd as well. Not all of their late-round picks. We're going to get the one that they did keep later on. But, it's real interesting how they've decided to keep Steven Sims and not keep Skowronek.
Well, Steven Sims, I mean, is a guy that if he could just get it right, I know they've kind of showcased him on returns, and, he's certainly not going to be getting too many touches as far as a receiver is concerned. But yeah, I honestly, it didn't surprise me too much that Sims stuck around.
Caserio loves water bug type wide receivers from his days in New England. You've got 3 of them now on the roster with Mechie, Tank Dell, and Steven Sims. So that's sort of his MO.
That must be it. Yeah, that's the other issue.
The other big news, besides Noah Brown, we mentioned earlier, Christian Harris goes to short-term IR, so he's at least out for 4 games. That one hurts because their backup linebackers right now, Stephen, Toa, Jake Hansen, Neville Hewitt, and somebody named Delshon Phillips, who I did not predict was going to make the linebacking core. I had him going with 5 linebackers, but with Harris out, it is 5 linebackers at the moment.
Well, and that's why, Robert, I know you've talked about this. If you traded somebody like a Robert Woods for a player at a position where there's a real need, and we obviously know linebacker's a real need, and it just, the injury to Christian Harris, I was a little surprised. I thought he might be ready. The only good news is he's on short-term IR, so he could come back after 4 weeks, as opposed to some other guys that I know we'll get to later who are not. But yeah, Christian Harris being out, even in a short-term IR situation, it really hurts because the Texans are already thin at that position. So you've got to figure something out, and they will. They're probably going to pick some guys up on the waiver wire, or they could do some kind of a minor deal, after we stop recording this. But you really wanted Christian Harris in there, especially to start the season.
I tried not to panic too much because we weren't seeing Christian Harris, and I don't even remember Steven out. Like, it's all a blur. He didn't get hurt playing football last year. It's been since then, I guess, right?
Unless it was something that happened at the very end of the season that we either just forgot about or wasn't made a big deal of. But no, I didn't think so either, Robert. It just seems like the whole preseason, though, we haven't seen him at all.
Yeah, it's that's a tough break. But, I said it in the post game, and I'll stick by it. The Texans got relatively lucky with injuries this training camp and preseason, but Case Keenum does go on IR. Tim Boyle released. I'm guessing maybe Boyle is put on the practice squad, Steven, and that's going to be where they throw the third quarterback for now.
Well, that's the only thing I can assume, Robert, because I'm just not one that is ever comfortable with having 2 quarterbacks on a roster. In this day and age, as many injuries as you see to quarterbacks, I feel like the Texans have got to do something where they have 3. They've got to, Case's injury certainly hurts. You want to have a veteran guy like Case around. Look how much he helped CJ last year. And when he did get in, I know he threw that interception in preseason, but come on. For the most part, Case Keenum doesn't make many mistakes. He's going to give you at least a solid game when he is in there. So the fact that, and he's on long term, he's going to be out for the season as far as I understand it. So you're not going to have him on the team all season. So I just hope the Texans will do something. And I realize a lot of it just has to do with overall roster construction, Robert. Because if you have another need that you've got to fill, you can't fill them all necessarily. And if you want to sacrifice just having 2 quarterbacks, but I myself am just not comfortable with that scenario.
Dario Gunbowale, our backup kicker, and maybe he's our third string quarterback. I don't know. He makes the roster. Dameon Pierce, I know fans not super happy with Dameon Pierce making the roster. They don't feel like Pierce has really showed anything. We didn't see him in the preseason, Steven, so it's so hard to make a judgment on this. But the times that we did see him, it's just, we keep coming back to it, but there's just nothing that got you excited. He was not making stuff happen. And we saw other guys come in there with not the best blocking and do stuff, whether it was J.J. Taylor, who didn't make the roster, or Jawar Jordan, or whoever. It just seemed like other guys could make stuff out of nothing, and Dameon Pierce couldn't. And it's a concern. Dameon Pierce right now, to me, if there is something that could happen, really, as far as guys picking up off the scrap heap, other guys that are going to be cut out there, it could definitely be running back in Pierce's spot.
I even said that I felt a change of scenery was good for Dameon Pierce, but I didn't get the sense from things that I read and heard that the Texans are quite where their fans are, where Dameon is concerned. I feel like they at least want to give him the benefit of the doubt, at least for part of this season. Now, if things continue to go south, you very well might see him released in the middle of the season, but I kind of got the feeling that as much as I know a lot of fans would like to see him gone, I think the Texans just want to give him a little more mileage, see if they can get any more mileage out of him. And I certainly don't see him as the direct backup to Joe Mixon, but he is still on the roster. So anything can happen, and they could still use him on return. So there's still things he could do, but it didn't surprise me too much that he made the roster. But, we can sit here and say, well, he needs to change the scenery. Maybe it's good for him. But who are we to say, really, in the long run?
Yeah, it's something that I feel like is very movable. Running backs are yesterday's newspaper. They just get thrown out with the trash usually. So it's surprising that they're so dead set on keeping with this guy that really hasn't looked good since about 2/3 of the way of his rookie season. But we'll see. Their 2 best cornerbacks last year, Desmond King and Tavier Thomas. Steven, they released Desmond, which is putting a ton of faith in Petrie. You basically move on from the guys that were your 2 best corners. Did you like putting all your eggs in the Petrie basket?
Well, I'm still not completely sold on him. He did show some good things this preseason, but that's a a small sample size against, questionable defenses. So if you're banking on that, Robert, but you know what? I've got to trust D'Amico Ryans on this, because if anybody knows defense, it's D'Amico, and he's not perfect by any means. But if he's the one that's having a big say in this, I'm going to trust that he knows what he's doing going forward. And yeah, it's a risk with Petrie, but I'm going to trust him on this one.
Well, moving on with the quarterback, CJ Henderson is out. Okudah survives among the 2 first-round busts Caserio took a flyer on. Miles Bryant, D'Angelo Ross, those 2 beat out Mike Ford. D'Angelo's edge on everybody, Stephen, was special teams, I'd assume.
That's the only thing I would say, Robert, because, yeah, CJ Henderson, I thought, that kind of caught me a little bit by surprise, too. So, yeah, that's the only thing you can think of is the special teams angle is what's coming into play here.
On Saturday's postgame, I predicted fullbacks Beck and Hairston were likely gone, or at the very least, Beck would be placed on the IR. I also said, Stephen, that I'd like British Brooks as a fullback because of his versatility. I am not a fullback fan unless they're versatile. And as of now, the Texans agreed with me for once.
They did, Robert. And you know what? I'm a bit intrigued by the British Brooks at fullback thing. I personally was pulling for British Brooks. I know I mentioned this, I think, on our last podcast, but he's quite a story. He could be a fan favorite if you just look at his story. He was a walk-on at North Carolina. In fact, he got one scholarship offer for Division I, Robert, and he turned it down because he wanted to go to North Carolina. His mind was made up, and he walked on despite having something like 10 running backs in front of him. So this guy's a great story. You're glad to see him make the Texans, but it's intriguing that I guess that they're looking at him as a fullback. So I'm going to be interested to see how that pans out.
And he's somebody that you could use in short yardage because, he's a big guy, bruiser. He's very low center of gravity. He's not that tall. So that's a guy that's going to be hard to tackle in a short space, get leverage on and bring him down. So that's good for him. A couple of other big deals, I guess, as far as the cuts go. Kurt Heinisch is on short-term IR. Brandon Hill's out for the season. And the Lonnie Johnson reunion tour is over. He was released. The rookie Jamal Hill beats out Lonnie for a spot. And Stephen, I also checked on the offensive lineman room. Nick Broker and Cam Irving did make it. I didn't think they would go with 10 altogether, but they did go with 10 linemen.
That's probably a good thing, Robert, in the sense of, heaven forbid, you hope that this doesn't happen, that the things that happened last year with all the injuries, maybe they are just trying to guard against something like that and just want to have enough. When I say depth, I mean depth as far as bodies go, because they sure needed to dip into pretty deep last year.
Was there any roster move that I missed that you were thinking about? Anybody that we didn't talk about yet? It's going to change, obviously. So
it's definitely fluid, especially at this. We got 2 weeks until the NFL season. My gosh, Robert, there are probably half a dozen moves that can happen between now and then. I couldn't remember. Did we mention Brandon Hill was also out on long term?
Yeah, Brandon Hill was a guy that was just, it's frustrating for that kid because now he's going to miss his, he's a rookie last year. So this is his second year. Yeah. We really won't get to see Brandon Hill at all.
Yeah, it's a shame. The guys like that, you keep wanting them to make the team, and every year something bad happens. How many times have we seen that year after year with the Texans, Robert? And, more often than not, it ends up just not going well for the player, in the long term.
And I forget how this all works, but some of these guys that are put on IR for this season, I think you can maybe bring a couple back designated for return, Stephen, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, you can. The rules are kind of muddy with that, but yes, you can. And then, of course, you have the long-term and the short-term reserve where they can come back sooner or they have to be out the entire season.
We're about to transition to the Astros, but quick reminder, look for our live Texans post-game shows right after every game this year. Tom Chavarria and I break it all down. This Thursday, I've got a Rockets expert scheduled, so keep an eye out for that. You can support us by giving us a thumbs up, commenting, and subscribing for free on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Stephen, who'd have thunk that splitting a 4-game road series against the O's, the 4th best team in baseball, would depress and anger Astros fans this weekend?
My, how quickly we get spoiled on winning, right? And just remember, it wasn't so long ago that the Orioles were the laughingstock of Major League Baseball. A few years ago, I think the Astros beat them like 23-1 in one game. So my, how time flies, just like the Orioles. But yeah, look, I'd take a split with them on the road. They certainly did well, better against them at home in this previous series. But when you were rolling along like the Astros are, Robert, and then this happens, it just shows you the Astros still have some holes, and there's no doubt about it. This has been just a season where just about every hole or weakness that the Astros have that you try to hide has been exposed. I'd say those holes were definitely exposed in the Orioles series.
It's like the dam breaking, and I don't know if anybody out there remembers the old cartoon. It seems like it was some old cartoon I used to watch where the dam breaks, and then the guy's holding like his hand trying to block one thing and then another thing, and he reaches out with the other hand, and then something else breaks, and he's got to reach out with his foot. And this is kind of the game that Dana Brown and Joe Espada have been left with this year. It's been nuts, but there was good news. Verlander looked like the LJV in his first start back, which is great. And last week, I asked you about a potential Hector Neris return, Stephen. His whip dropped from 1.054 with the Astros last year to 1.523 with the Cubs. But you and I know that relievers' numbers can be volatile. And if he's fixable, he also brings all sorts of intangibles.
Well, he does. And boy, were we overjoyed when we found out that Hector Neris is coming back, and he got a key strikeout the other day. Sometimes right when especially if you come back to a team that you left, or you're pitching against a former team, you need a crucial out at a crucial time in the game. Sometimes he come through for you. But no, it's great to have Hector Neris back, Robert. And a lot of the reasons you mentioned, not just what he does on the mound, but the leadership in the bullpen is really important this time of year. Here's the thing: you were talking about how tough the job of Dana Brown and Joe Espada is. This time of year. It's like you have to mix and match because you can't make trades. So you either have to get guys who, been DFA'd by other teams, which the Astros did. They've been putting Ben Gamel out there, and they got him DFA'd from the Mets.
You just signed Jason Heyward.
Let's
get to that, because that name sounds good if you haven't looked at his stats in recent years. But he's 34 years old, and 3 of his last 4 years, he's terrible offensively. Last year's OPS was 813.
Yeah.
So he had a bounce back, but the other 3 seasons, his OPS 627, 556, and 682 this year. So, Stephen, I guess he's an improvement over Chaz, but barely.
Well, here's what he does give you, Robert. He is a veteran. He does have a left-handed bat. It's like they are kind of grabbing at straws, because we talked about this last week. The Astros outfield, their numbers across the board are very disappointing. Yes, I know Kyle Tucker's out, but come on. They shouldn't be this low with Kyle out, especially because Chas McCormick having such a down year, all the way across here. And Jake Myers got off to a great start, was moving along for a while, but now he's cooled off. So it's like mix and match there. I mentioned Ben Gamel. He came in, he started off hot. He's kind of cooled off a bit. You've had Trey Cabbage up and down a bit. You had Joey Loperfido there for a while until you traded him. So the Astros outfield is another thing where, you thought you had a lot of depth there, but just because of the fact that Kyle's been out, and you don't want Jordan to play left field a lot, and Chas McCormick has struggled, you're doing the mix and match game here.
One name you did mention, Pedro Leon had a real opportunity. The strikeouts were bad. We discussed it, but I wish Espada threw him out there for a few games in a row. It almost always takes rookies a while to get familiar with major league pitching and the speed. And Pedro came in red hot, Stephen. So when a guy comes in red hot, just to sit him a lot of that time right when he gets up didn't make a whole lot of sense. And he brings a lot of speed and power too.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Robert, because that's the thing that I would say is if you're going to bring somebody up, they need to play, especially with somebody that was on the trajectory that Pedro was. It's a catch-22. The Astros are still in the thick of a pennant race. You can't afford to experiment that much. But if you're going to bring a guy like him up and you really think he can help you, put him in for 2 or 3 games in a row at the very least and just see what he can do, especially if you're going to put him in place of somebody like Chas McCormick. What else do you have to lose there? At least he can't do much worse. So let's see if you've got something in the interim with Pedro Leon and give him more of a shot than he did.
Yeah, he sort of, I remember, had a bonehead outfield mistake, which
he did.
That's an issue. You can't have everything go wrong in that one position, and that's something that, of course, Chaz, that's the sort of thing he typically doesn't make, but then he did. He had that play where he didn't charge a ball, turned a single into a double. But I was just wondering, Stephen, if every Astro is healthy, who's in your ideal playoff lineup besides the automatic 7? I assume Jake Myers is part of that automatic 7. Altuve, Bregman, Jordan, Yanner, Pena, and Tucker. In other words, is Singleton at first base or is it someone else? Is Jordan playing left field or DH? And if so, like whichever one you pick, who's playing left field or DH besides Jordan?
Well, I know that, the Astros are reluctant to have Jordan in left so often. And, my reason for the reasoning for that obviously is because you want to keep him healthy. He's had knee problems in the past. And you also, having him as your DH is a really good thing. But if Chas McCormick was having a better year, I'd say it's a no-brainer. But right now, like I said, I don't want to trust somebody like Gamble or Trey Cabbage or and Jason Heyward. I mean, he's not even on the team quite yet. So you can't even throw him into the mix. I don't know how you not do that, Robert. And that's really where I think the Astros are going to struggle, is because their outfield is just not produced. I think you've got to put him in there.
So if Jordan's playing left, you want Singleton at first base, you're saying, and then who do you have at DH at that point?
Well, that is the tough question. I mean, you could, because you have Victor Caratini. I mean, you could have Yainer be your DH the way he's been hitting. I mean, that's not a bad thing to do because Caratini's a veteran. The pitchers do like catching him, and Caratini's not a bad hitter. He is an upgrade over what you've had at catching the last few years. I'm not saying you would do that every game, but I think for most games, that's not a bad thing to do.
You're in the playoffs. What are you doing? Are you doing that?
That's where I'm talking about.
Okay.
That's what I'm talking about, in the playoffs.
Yeah. So I want to get to that idea in a second, but for a little bit, I do want to talk about Shea Whitcomb, because I've loved everything that I've seen from Whitcomb. I wish the Astros had given him more time at first base in the minors. If you don't know, in 4 seasons, he only played 6 games there. The majority of his games
he's a shortstop.
Were at mostly second base and third base, is from what I saw, and the numbers on Baseball Reference was second and third base.
Right.
Look, the kid knows the strike zone. He's hitting lasers everywhere and has shown legit base running in his time up so far. If this is the playoffs, this is what I would guess. You'd want Dubon in left field and Jordan DHing for defensive purposes, because Dubon is so good out there in left field, and you don't want to take any chances in a playoff game. However, if you are considering, having Jordan play left field and adding some more offense, then I would really potentially think about Whitcomb at DH with Jordan in left, because if I'm going offense, Stephen, I don't want to use Yainer and Caratini together out there, because I'd worry about losing a catcher to some sort of injury. And then where are you? You have to go to the pitcher hitting or something like that, right?
Well, that's a good point. And the reason that I didn't put Shea Whitcomb in there, well, there are 2 reasons. I don't feel comfortable putting him at first base in the playoffs, especially where defense matters so much. I'm not sure. As suspect a hitter as John Singleton, or as inconsistent a hitter as John Singleton is, the one thing I will say is he's at least shown me something defensively at first base that I haven't seen with anybody else. Now, you talk about Shea Whitcomb as a DH. Well, possibly. I mean, right now, if you're looking at his numbers as we're recording this, at least the ones I have, yours might be different, Robert, but I have him with 25 at-bats. He's got a 280, 400, 800 slash line. That's not bad. I mean, you look at Zach DeCenzo's and they're much lower. But I need to see more of Shea as a hitter in the major leagues before I'm comfortable putting him in a DH position. But that's not a bad scenario to have, especially, and your point about Caratini and Yainer Diaz in the lineup at the same time certainly holds true. The last thing you want is to have an injury in any position at the playoffs, but certainly as a catcher. But I had my reservations about Whitcomb being a DH just because of the sample size, and being at first base just because of his defense. And Dubon in left, defensively, yes, that's great. But even his numbers have tailed off offensively. So it is a struggle, because you're going offense against defense, which is better when you're trying to put these positions together.
Yeah, and my thing is I would not have Whitcomb playing. He hasn't played first base. They haven't even tried. They've played 8 guys at first base, I think, at this point, and not one of them has been Shea Whitcomb. So obviously they're not comfortable with him at first base. So yeah,
you're sure not going to put him there in the playoffs then.
Right. And that's my point, is like DH would be where you would play him. And I'm saying if you go offense, I would sort of rather have him out there than Caratini, just because I'm scared of the injury to the catching position, because you only have a couple guys on the roster to begin with. However, like I would have no problem with Dubon out there, because if you don't have somebody that you're super confident in offensively, you would rather basically take Jordan out of there and have somebody that's a hell of a lot better defensively and improve yourself there. And I will say this, Stephen, when I look at Shea Whitcomb and DeCenzo, both of those guys, they got to go to Winter League ball this offseason and work on their defense at first base. If they can be competent, both are a major upgrade over Singleton offensively. Although if Bregman isn't signed, Whitcomb might need to work on his defense at third base, because that's where he's going to be.
Well, that's the other thing. And you're talking about the playoffs, but looking beyond the playoffs, I think you're looking very hard at Whitcomb taking over at third base because I am pretty confident. I mean, weird things could happen. But, if Alex Bregman demands too much money and the market doesn't want to fall for it, then who knows? You could work something out with the Astros, but I'm not confident about that. So I'm assuming that Alex Bregman walks next year, and Shay Whitcomb, I think, is going to get a very hard look as your third baseman. But, here's the other reasoning too, Robert, about why you would hesitate to put Jordan in left field, especially in big ballparks, like Philadelphia or some of those others, and you get in the playoffs. You don't want Jordan in a huge ballpark trying to cover left field. So that is another, feather in the cap of why you put him at DH.
And we say ideal lineup, and I threw out Kyle Tucker in there. It's like now we're getting excited over Kyle Tucker can eat his
He's
food.
Sprinting, Robert. Come on. I just saw it before we went on the air. Kyle Tucker is sprinting. That has to be good, right?
Can he eat his food right now without dropping it on his leg and hurting him? I don't know what's going on with him.
Oh, my goodness. I read fairly recently, there was a very nice write-up in The Athletic about these types of injuries. And, of course, they consulted 3 different doctors, and none of them, A, have examined Kyle Tucker, nor B, have seen his x-ray. So, they're commenting on what everyone else knows, like you and me, Robert. But what they did point out is these kinds of injuries are extremely unpredictable. And obviously what Tucker has is one of those that just will not go away. I mean, it's a shin injury. If you've ever had shin splints, let me tell you, those things are as painful as anything. They usually, go away. But something like this that's hung on for months and months and months, don't you know, if Kyle Tucker was ready to play, the Astros would have him out there 3 months ago or 2 months ago. I guess it hasn't been quite that long. So that's really the problem. You don't know whether to pencil Kyle Tucker in your playoff roster or not.
I sort of glossed over it when you threw it out there, Stephen, but you said, Singleton has been pretty competent defensively, and I'm comfortable with him. Or did you catch the game on Saturday?
Well, I saw, I understand that. And yeah, he made some, and I think there was another play a little further back, but he's also made some good plays back there. But if you're comparing him to some of the other guys we talked about, I mean, at least you know what you've got, right? You know that it's not Yuli Gurriel out there, or some of the others that have been, you don't have a Yuli Gurriel at first base. You just don't. So who else you got?
It's so unreal that this team that's done such a great job at finding guys and, getting guys to come up from the minor leagues and do stuff, literally can't find a first baseman or outfield. The 2 easiest positions that you would think to find in the minor leagues, Stephen, is those 2 positions.
Well, you would think, and the Astros have certainly done their share of trying, but as far as, going out and getting free agents, well, there's the money issue to consider. There's somebody good out there, but how much are you willing to pay him? And this all goes back to signing Jose Abreu to that contract. Here we go again, because now look what it's done. It has set you back at a position. I mean, every position on the field is key, Robert, but let's be honest. First base, not only defensively, but you expect your first baseman to hit and to hit with power. And the Astros just haven't gotten that.
And the thing I see is you see people, I've seen sports media in Houston say stuff like, well, the Astros, they didn't come into the season with enough offensively, and they didn't do anything offensively at the deadline. Playing this sort of relitigation game, Stephen, really bugs me because, look, the Astros came into this was their lineup coming into the season. Jose Altuve, Hall of Famer. Alex Bregman, one of the better third basemen in Major League Baseball, all-star. Jordan, best hitter in baseball. Kyle Tucker was an MVP candidate about 2 months into the season, one of the best right fielders in the game. Yonder Diaz, best hitting offensive catcher right now in Major League Baseball. Then Jeremy Pena, World Series MVP, formerly. That's your top 6 in the lineup. And that's not including Jose Abreu, who they were stuck with. They were just flat out stuck with. But yeah, the bottom of the lineup didn't look good with Jose Abreu and Jake Myers. But Chas McCormick, you come into the season with a guy that had hit 836 OPS or something like that last year. And the last 2 years, he was really, really good as a hitter and came up with big hits in big situations. How do you know that guy's going to fall apart? Abreu, as bad as he was last year, how do you know that it's going to turn into the worst hitter in baseball? And then at the trade deadline, Stephen, what were they supposed to do? It was a seller's market. They had to give up 3 great prospects, or they're 3 of their better prospects. I don't know if they're great by Baseball America standards, but 3
at least 2 of them anyway.
Yeah, 3 guys that you didn't want to give up just for Kikuchi for 9 or 10. I mean, that's literally all you're going to get probably from Kikuchi. And that took that. And then what do you have left to trade for a hitter? And again, if you've watched the game at all for the last 150 years, pitching wins in the end.
Yeah, and listen, I know we've talked about the holes in the Astros outfield for a good 10 minutes, but look, the Astros offense is not the real crux of the team's problem. Pitching has been. You had to go out and get pitching at the deadline. It was absolutely crucial. And then look what dropped into your lap. Hector Neris, for goodness sake. I mean, how about that? I mean, who would have thought that, Robert? Here he is. So the Astros are getting help at pitching, just what they needed. They had to do it at the deadline. There's just no way about it. You talked about what they gave up for Kikuchi. And look, is the guy blowing stuff by you? Is he pitching 7, 8 innings? No. But he's giving you quality starts, at least through 5 innings. And the Astros have won every start he's been in so far in his 5 starts. So, I mean, it could be worse. And that's just it. You've got to have the pitching going into the playoffs. You've just got to. The offense, I think, is going to figure itself out. Look, we talked about who would be the potential starters. Well, look, that still leaves people like Shay Whitcomb. You can still have a guy like that on the roster if he's continuing to hit. Then, yeah, you can put him in a backup role. You can have him pinch hit. You can have him DH every once in a while. I'm not that concerned about the Astros offense, despite the holes that we've just talked about. I think it's going to be okay. But in the playoffs, like you said, pitching is what's going to do it. You're going to be facing some great pitching of your own, and you've got to come through. But I just think the offense is fine, at least as it's going to be.
And I just have to remind everybody that's like, every time there's a little hole in the Astros roster, let's remember, he did sign Victor Caratini, who's been incredible. He did find bargain basement guys like Taylor Scott and Brian King. Like, where did those guys come from? And what have they brought to you? I mean, I know they're not perfect, but oh my God, where would the Astros be without those two pitching the way that they pitch? And don't forget about Ronel Blanco, which was a definite Dana Brown decision to move him as a starter. You could say he didn't get him, but he might as well have got him, because if you don't know where this guy is going to work, then you make a mistake there and he's gone. And then maybe he goes and he flourishes for another team. But instead, the Astros got a guy that's been one of their better pitchers all this year. And he's still doing it despite, I think he's something like 16, 17 innings over what he's ever pitched in his career. And he still goes out there and gives you a gutsy several. It's not great anymore, but it's still really solid stuff.
Well, that's right. And you know what, Robert, over the course of a 162-game season, you are going to have guys, if you're going to be a good team anyway, you're going to have guys who are going to come in at certain times of the year and give you something, whether it's, a month, a couple weeks, maybe the course of a couple of months. I hate to bring him up because he is so despised by the Astros, and with good reason, because of the cheating scandal. But remember, in 2017, even though for the most part, Mike Fiers was a bust and he was a tattletale, there was 1 month where he came in when the Astros were really struggling, had some injuries. He actually came in, and I believe it was the month of June, and actually kept the team propped up until some of those guys could get healthy. It's guys like that can come in. And this year, those guys you just mentioned have all contributed at one time or another to what the Astros are doing, especially since June, when they have risen from the ashes, when they were about dead and burned, to take the lead in the AL West.
Yep, no question about it. Let's close things out with a fond farewell to ex-Love You Blue Oiler defensive lineman Mike Stensrud, who passed away at 68 of a heart attack. And Stensrud was the Oilers' second-round pick back in 1979, 31st overall, played 7 years for the Oilers, 95 games, 46 starts. He played 11 years in the NFL after earning a spot in the Iowa State Cyclone Hall of Fame. And Stephen, there's a couple of Texans connections. His son, Andy, was an offensive tackle at Iowa State and roomed with former Houston Sports Talk guest and Texan J.J. Moses.
Hey.
Andy Stensrud was undrafted, but I must have missed this, but back in 2003, the Texans signed Andy, although he never made the roster, but he was a Texan.
Huh. Well, I must have missed it. I don't remember that either. I certainly remember Mike Stensrud because, that's definitely in my era, the Love You Blue. And now, Robert, when I saw the news, I was trying to think now, who have we lost from the Love You Blue? Mike Stensrud, we lost Kenny Burrow. It seemed like there was one other, I'm trying to think.
Or Curly Culp.
Culp. Yeah. I knew there was another defensive guy that I was trying to think of. It seemed like it was yesterday when we had Love You Blue from that era, the late 70s to about the mid 80s. And Mike Stensrud, I guess he got the best and the worst of Love You Blue, because he came in 79 when the Oilers were still winning. Of course, they went through the years in the 80s where they just got completely terrible. So he lived through both sides of it. But gosh, really sad to hear that news.
Yeah, and every time we lose one of the Love You Blue guys, it takes a piece of my heart because, I've talked about this a bunch on the show, but it's one of my all-time favorite teams, and I wish
a piece of your childhood goes when that happens.
Yeah, I wish Houston Texans fans that weren't around back then could go back in a time machine and just sort of feel that atmosphere and what that's all about. Hopefully, we'll see a little bit, just a piece of it, if not more, this year with the Texans and where they are, and I just know that we've got the most beloved Houston coach since Bum Phillips and D'Amico Ryans, and the most beloved quarterback that maybe we've seen ever, and even including Warren Moon, maybe.
Just think, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, and I guess what, Love You Blue has been almost 40 for us. Oh my gosh, I don't even want to talk about it.
Over 40, yeah.
Over 40. You think about that, 30, 40 years from now, if the Texans really are putting something special together, I mean, we'll be talking about guys like CJ Stroud and Will Anderson Jr. and Tank Dell and D'Amico Ryans as the beloved coach. It's fun to think about. It's fun to think about. Obviously, it's too small a sample size. They've only had one good season so far. But man, you hope this is the start of something, because they really do have a lot of special guys on this team, Robert. I know you and I are rooting for them. There's a lot of Texans fans rooting. That last year is only the beginning of what can happen.
Again, rest in peace, Mike Stensrud. And don't forget to tune in to our show later this week. We'll have a special Rockets expert. You'll want to hear that, as all Rockets fans out there. I'm sure everybody's dying to get the season going. We're just over a month away. It's coming up pretty quickly where we'll start camp and preseason and all that sort of stuff. So it's almost here. But thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.